Hi everyone, and welcome to Moxxie Life Coaching. I'm Michelle, and I'll be your host as we explore what life coaching is and how it can empower you to create and live your best life. We'll talk about topics ranging from our own self-defeating behaviors to getting to know our authentic selves. Together, we'll investigate a variety of self-coaching modalities and explore a wide range of topics relevant to getting the most out of the life that you are actively creating. New episodes will drop every Tuesday, so please subscribe so you don't miss out on the great hints, tips, and tricks, and generally awesome content that will help you create your best life. So welcome, and thank you for listening. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Moxxie Coaching Pep Talk podcast, your guide to finding and embracing your authentic self. I have just one quick announcement before we start the show today, and that is that I have posted a fun little quiz on the Moxxie Coaching website that's designed to help you explore whether or not life coaching would be something that would be good for you. And if you're interested in taking a look at that quiz, you can find it on my website at moxxiecoaching.com/quiz. And that is moxxiecoaching.com/quiz. So I hope that you find it fun and ideally, you'll find it informative as well. This week, we're going to be talking about the intentionally created life. And you might be wondering, what is an intentionally created life? Well, my definition is a life lived with a clear and conscious emphasis on gaining an understanding of what we want our lives to look like, as opposed to living a life where we just go with the flow and react to things as opposed to responding thoughtfully and moving ourselves forward in the way that we want to be moved forward. One thing that I want to make clear before we get started is that, at least in my opinion and in my experience, there's a difference between intentional creation and an effort to control. In my mind, intentionally creating something is more about allowing something to happen. It's about surrendering to the knowledge that we can't control a lot of what goes on in our lives. It's about surrendering to the knowledge that trying to control everything brings us nothing but grief and frustration, feelings of inadequacy, interpersonal conflict, all of those icky things that we don't like to feel. So instead of looking inside and asking ourselves questions that are designed to help us figure out how we can control what we don't like, how about we consider looking inside and getting a very clear idea of what we want, identifying what we control and what we can't control, and then making some intentional decisions to address the things that we want and the things that we can't control, and then come up with a method of working with those things that we can't control, or working with the anxieties, or working with the frustration or consequences of the things that we can't control. Ultimately, as much as we would like to, I'm going to take that back. As much as I would like, I can't assume everyone else has a controlling streak the way I do. A controlling streak that I have been working on for a really long time. And I continue to struggle with it. But that is also how I came about my opinion about the intentionally created life. So, we can't control what other people say. We can't control whether or not they like us. I mean, of course, unless you're being just a jerk and you deserve to be disliked. But in terms of our general beingness, and when we meet someone, we can tell sometimes it just doesn't click. There's an instant, no, that person doesn't like me for some reason. And that's okay. And that is very hard to wrap our heads around sometimes. That, well, why wouldn't they like me? But I think that's a topic for another podcast. We also have no control over the decisions other people make. We don't have any control over the actions people take. We don't have any control over how they perceive us. And trying to control all of these things is, in my opinion, an exercise in futility, or certainly an exercise in frustration. And in my experience, a way to find yourself feeling almost victimized. And that is not a fun or an empowering place to be. I'll give you an analogy. Uh, kind of a silly one, but I think it works. An analogy that hopefully will help you understand what I'm talking about when I say that, as opposed to controlling, living a life of intention is about allowing, okay? So when I say that, it doesn't mean that there's no action behind the allowing. In a way, it's almost a surrender to what is, and coming to terms with what we can manage and control, what we can't manage to control. But in terms of the allowing part of the intentional creation, So let's say, for example, that I want to live an intentionally created life. And to me, that life looks like doing something as a vocation that is helpful to others. It looks like having more days of feeling upbeat and positive and like I'm making a contribution than days when I'm blah and grumpy. I mean, these are just core things to how I want to be living. It's my intention to live my life with joy. And to me, that means noticing the things that make me feel joyous, noticing the things that make me smile or touch my heart in some way. I also want to live a life that is supported by close friendships and friendships with people who have similar thoughts and ideas, but also people who challenge me, who aren't, yes people. So for me, what I have found to get to that point in my life, it's been far more about identifying specifically what I want it to look like, putting it out consciously to the universe. And in my personal practice, that would be talking to my spirit guides during meditation or writing it down in a journal and clearly stating that this is a request to the universe. And putting that energy out there, putting out the vibe of what I want and how I want my life to look, and then backing it up by acting upon the things that I want. So here's the analogy. Let's say that you want to create a cube-shaped tomato, all right? So you could take that tomato and you could cut all of the curved surfaces, trying to make it cube-shaped. You could try to squish it into a cube the way you squish clay through brute force and control. Or you could put a little hollow box mold around the tomato when it's teeny tiny. And as that tomato grows, it will grow into the shape of the cube. You created that cubed shaped tomato with intention and with a gentle action, but not through brute force. And it came to fruition really very, very easily. And that, I think, is the analogy that I want you to think about in terms of allowing and acting versus controlling and pushing and bulldozing. Choosing conscious creation is something I think a lot of people go through life and never really even realize that it's a choice for them. I would say that most certainly this type of conscious creation that I'm talking about is new, in that when I think back about the lives that my relatives had, so much of the time that they were on this planet was spent just literally trying to survive, trying to get out of those first two levels of Maslow's hierarchy, that they certainly did not have time or the energy or probably the patience to think about consciously creating their lives. They probably didn't realize it was a possibility because they were so deeply entrenched in what was immediately in front of them. Living in a well-to-do country, living with the amount of privilege that most people who would be that most people who would be listening to this podcast have, gives us the room and, yes, the privilege to create a life like this. I fully recognize that there are so many people on this earth right now who are still in a situation where they're just working to get through the day. And they're working like my parents did, or my grandparents did, or my great-grandparents did. And that's okay. I'm certainly not saying that conscious creation is something that you have to do to have a fulfilling life. I'm just saying that if you have the luxury of putting some time and effort into this conscious creation, you will be rewarded. I'm a good example of someone who did not, until recently, really choose this consciously created life that I'm talking about. Our cultural and societal norms make a lot of us who might be naturally inclined to step outside the boundaries of what's normal continue to color within the lines. I was an artistic kid. I was a sensitive kid. I was a creative kid. There are a lot of things that I look back on and wonder if I had been more of an independent and less timid child, if I would have made the choices that I made. So I did not live a life of intention until I would say about 5 years ago. Instead, I floated along. I just did whatever I was doing because that's what everybody else did, right? You go to school and then you go to college and then you get married and then you have a child and then you do this and then you do that. All of those things, with the exception of the child, all of those things were things that were in a way just put in front of me and things that I would look at and say, yeah, okay, it's here. I'll take it. I'll go in this direction. And I suppose you could say that that's going with the flow. I would argue, at least in my situation, that it was taking the easy way out. I was living by reacting to external stimulus as opposed to making my own conscious choices. And it wasn't probably until I was close to 50 that I realized that it's okay to have a very clear vision of how you want your life to look. But for me to become the person I wanted to be, I had to be willing to step outside of those societal expectations. I had to be willing to be all right with letting go of the standard American success story. I had to be okay with not caring about having an enormous house that looks like it came out of Better Homes and Gardens. I had to get past worrying what other people thought of me. I had to get past choosing careers that were not lucrative. And I chose those careers because they fed my soul in a way that other things I had done in the past did not. But the choices I made in my career, while I would say I became, I had a certain level, I hit a certain level of achievement, I suppose you could say. And I'm very, very proud of what I've done in the business world and in the realm of career and all of that. I never in my life made a boatload of money. And that was really difficult for me in some ways. And it came to basically me being frustrated with not having the amount of money that I wanted and felt like I needed. And taking some time to look at, okay, what are my options? If I'm not happy, then I need to make more money. And when I started to look at what I was qualified to do, short of going back and getting a third degree or a master's or whatever, I started to look at what I needed to do, and I wasn't willing to go back to school and start all over again. I was not willing to take a job that I felt was not a contribution. And so that was a conscious choice on my part to make a decision not to be worried about living in that space, not to be worried about what everybody else thought. And, quite frankly, not to get caught up in the social media, what do I want to call it? The illusion, the my life is wonderful illusion. That's what I want to say. Because it seems to me that most often we post things on social media that are illustrative of the good things in our life. And when we go back and look at someone's feed, it's like, oh my gosh, they traveled here and they did that and they bought this and they da 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 da. But, that doesn't mean anything. And it finally dawned on me one day that that's what was going on. And so it helped me deal with that, what do I want to call it? That head game. I had to come to terms with it being okay for me to decide that it was more important to me, that my work was fulfilling, that it contributed to the betterment of everybody, than it was to making a ton of money just for the sake of having money and having stuff. I think that there is a balance between intention and control. And the trick is to figure out how to strike that balance. What is the alternative to an intentionally created life? If we choose to be the go with the flow people, if we choose to let outside circumstances determine what our life is going to look like, what does that mean? Well, in my mind, that means it's a life lived at the whims of other people and a life lived at the whims of, I don't know what, fate, the universe, whatever. It's a choice of going through the motions that are determined by other people, outside influences, going through cultural motions or going through religious motions or societal motions. There's so much pressure on us to be a certain way depending on what cultural group we're a part of, that it's really, really difficult to not just stay in this space of following social norms and following the patterns, choosing career, choosing education, lifestyle choices, I think, are some of the biggest choices that really get crushed in our failure to create an intentional life. And those lifestyle choices, a lot of times, are really the juicy stuff in our life. Our career, our education, those are things that are a means to an end. But to make an unconscious choice to just go with the flow and avoid doing something that we know in our heart is not for us, in my mind, is very sad. So how do we gain consciousness? And I think that the first step is certainly just becoming aware that you have choice. And I didn't become aware that I had choice until I started to do some personal development work on my own. And I started to look at the life that I was living at the moment, the life that I was dissatisfied with, and I started to look into what it would take to consciously create my own life that I wanted to live for myself, that I feel moves me forward in a way that I want to move forward. And I have no idea where I was going with that. Oh, yeah, by believing that you're worth the effort. And you are. You are worth the effort to consciously create your own life. I think there are a lot of people out there who don't feel that they deserve anything better than what they have. For one reason or another, whether it was childhood stuff, whether it was, I don't know, whatever it is, for whatever reason, so many of us walk around this life feeling like we're less than. And so many of us walk around feeling like we don't deserve this, that, or the other. And I think we need to change our perception of things and look at things like, yeah, we do deserve it. Now, when I say deserve good things, it doesn't mean that good things come to you without you making an effort. What I mean is that if you're willing to make the effort, you deserve the good things that come your way. Whether it is consciously choosing to work your fanny off for the next 10 years so you can take 5 years off. I don't know, whatever it is. But know that you have more choice in this life than you may have originally thought. We need to begin looking at where we are when we are ready to make that step to intentionally, consciously creating our life. We need to look at where we are. We need to look at the friends we've chosen. Have we chosen supportive friends? Have we chosen friends who, regardless of whether they agree with what you're saying, will support you in what you're trying to accomplish? If those are not your friends, it may be time to start expanding your circle and finding some friendships where there is mutual support. Friendships can very, very easily just become another social pressure. You know, we care a lot about what our friends think. And if we're concerned that our friends are going to think we're weird or our friends are going to disagree with us, and we choose not to do something that feels really in alignment with us, that's a shame, first of all, and it's not being authentic to yourself. You also need to look at your career. Are you fulfilled by your career? How about other social relationships? How about living in a place where you can get the most out of it based on what you like to do? To gain consciousness, I think we need to look at those things. I think we need to sit down, set aside a few moments to open ourselves up and figure out what we really want. And I truly believe that a lot of us avoid opening ourselves up for fear of what we might find. And I understand that. And I would encourage you to try to work through that. And we can talk about that in another podcast about embracing and exploring those difficult emotions. In thinking about living a consciously created life, in thinking about intentionally creating something, I started to think about whether or not it's a selfish thing. Because That's my MO. That's baggage from my past. Um, you know, in my past, taking time away from attention that I may be paying to other people and using that time for myself felt selfish. So I started to think about that. Is my taking time to step out of the swirl and really look at what I want my life to look like, how I want to feel when I wake up in the morning, how I want to feel when I go to bed at night. I don't think it's selfish, but it took me a while to figure that out. I think that in my experience, working on intentionally creating my life has made me appreciate some of the things I have a lot more. And I think that I have more emotional energy to share. My cup is more full because I am living my intentionally created life. And when my cup is full, it's easier for me to give to others. So I think that other people benefit as well when we choose to live these intentionally or creatively, consciously created lives. People who are consciously creating their lives, I think, are more likely to see the events that they experience, at least in part as a result of a choice that they made. And while they might not be happy of the consequences of the choice that they made, they will take responsibility for it and not look to other people to blame, right? So someone who is, quote, woke enough to want to work toward consciously creating their life is also going to take responsibility for the choices that they make and for the areas and the ways that they create. And if they make a poor decision or they make a choice that they end up not being happy with, they're more likely to take responsibility for it than to blame someone else. Well, if I am consciously creating my own life and I'm making my own choices, then I might be kind of bummed about a decision I made, but I'm certainly not going to blame it on anybody else. I also think that when we are consciously creating our lives, that energy of creation, that energy that is created through creation, they feed on each other? I don't know. But I feel like it adds a lot more positive energy and creative energy to the universe. When we are actively working to add that positive, creative element to our lives, it just adds more positivity and creativity and good energy to the universe. I also believe people who are living a consciously created life can be good role models for other people. And I don't mean good role models as in we run around telling other people how to live their lives, or we run around telling people that they might think they're happy, but they're not. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about being a quiet role model for those who are ready to notice that they are ready to take the next step. And having interacted with someone like you who is living that consciously created life provides a good role model for others to do the same. And in terms of benefits to ourselves, Socrates said that an unexamined life is not worth living, which I thought was interesting, and I've heard it a million times, but didn't really let it gestate, let it marinate until recently. And I'm going to disagree with him in that I think every life is worth living, because regardless of whether it's examined or not, we are here in these physical bodies to learn what we decided we wanted to learn before we were even born. So the idea that an unexamined life is not worth living, I will disagree with. But I will say that in my experience, the shift to an examined life is more fulfilling. It's more rich. It's more juicy. I also think that we're more likely to achieve our goals when we are consciously creating something, because if you're consciously creating something, you are looking at it in detail, you're turning it over, you're looking on the inside, you're opening the cover, you're more clear about what you're trying to achieve. And the more clear you are about what you're trying to achieve, the more likely you are to achieve that goal. And lastly, in terms of living an intentionally created life, I think that by doing so, we keep better tabs on what we want. We keep better tabs on how to get there. We recognize that those things are constantly changing, and the consistent reevaluation of what we want and where we're headed helps us stay in a really great state of flow and a state of creation, and a state where we're less likely to be stagnant, less likely to wake up 5 years from now and wonder what the heck happened to the time. Waking up 5 years from now and feeling like that past 5 years could have been so much better spent. So I would encourage you, if you are not typically someone who digs around in your own head, to do a little bit of that and to just start thinking about the fact that you do have the right to live the life that you engineer. And that by doing so, you're likely to be happier, you're likely to be more content. Those you bring into your life are likely to be better fits. And I think that it's also a contribution to the greater good, to have that energy and to express that energy and to, like I said, be a role model for others. So I would recommend anyone who's interested to really sit down and think about, what do you have control over? What do you not have control over? What are you content with? What are you not content with? Of the things that you are finding you are not content with, what can you do about them? Can you make changes to a circumstance, or do you need to change the way you're thinking about something? I hope that you found this informative and at least thought-provoking, whether you agreed with me or not. I personally have found that digging in and churning things and looking at them from all different angles has been good for me. And that's why I wanted to share it with you. Take it or leave it, completely up to you. I recognize that some of what I say in these podcasts may resonate with you and some of it may not. But it's all delivered in the spirit of kindness and in the spirit of delivering something positive to the universe. So thank you so much for listening, regardless of whether or not you decide you want to start looking at and examining your life. I appreciate your taking the time to listen today. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe. You can reach me on my website, moxxiecoaching.com, Moxxie, moxxiecoaching.com. You can also reach me on Facebook or Instagram, and I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear about your experiences with consciously creating your own life. And in the meantime, be well, have a fantastic week, and I will look forward to talking to you next week. Bye-bye.